the American government, the American influences, the Commonwealth Government, the Philippines under the Japanese military, the battle against oppressors. The Spanish rule finally came to an end after the Spanish-American War concluded with America taking control over Philippines. At this time, the main goal of the United States in the Philippines was to turn the country into a self-sufficient capitalistic democracy. The US did this by creating infrastructure that would improve the literacy and economy of the country. As a result, literacy doubled to about half by the 1930s, and a fourth of the educated population could speak English. This was a massive influence for the Filipino culture, as English became the dominant language alongside the official Filipino language of Tagalog. The United States did not focus on religion like Spain did, but they helped create religious freedom for the people of the Philippines. They also created influence for a government and educational system for the Philippines throughout their rule. As time went on, as technology improved, the Americans brought influence to clothing, food to the Philippines as well. The biggest influence that can be seen today is found in the Philippine government and economic system. Throughout American rule in the 20th century, the main goal was to bring democratic and capitalistic ideas to the Philippines, and they did so successfully. It wasn't seen right away, and the government still varies from nationalist to federalist as history goes on, but the influence of American ideas is still there. The Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Philippines provided for a presidential system of government with a unicameral legislature. It had the power to enact laws for the Philippines, known as Commonwealth Acts, through the National Assembly. It was established following the Tidings-McDuffie Act to replace the insular government, a United States territorial government. The Commonwealth was designed as a transitional administration in preparation for the country's full achievement of independence. Its foreign affairs remained managed by the United States. The 1935 Constitution provided the legal basis of the Commonwealth Government, which was considered a transition government before the granting of Philippine independence with American-inspired Constitution. The Philippine government would eventually pattern its government system after the American government. Nowadays, a Commonwealth has come to mean any government in which all people involved have a say, or a loose formation of nations with a shared loyalty. The Commonwealth era was interrupted when the Japanese occupied the Philippines in January 2, 1942. The Commonwealth government, led by Manuel L. Quezon and Sergio Osmeña, went into exile in the U.S. Quezon died of tuberculosis while in exile, and Osmeña took over as president. At the same time, the Japanese forces installed a puppet government in Manila headed by Jose P. Laurel as president. This government is known as the Second Philippine Republic. Japanese forces invaded the Philippines in a sneak attack on military installations in Luzon 10 hours after Pearl Harbor in Hawaii was bombed, triggering World War II in the Pacific. The objective of the strikes at Pearl Harbor and the Philippines was to shield Japan's drive southward to seize the oil and natural sources of Southeast Asia and the Dutch East Indies. The strategy was to clear the U.S. forces in the Philippines out to prevent its use by Allied forces as a forward base of operations against the Japanese home islands. The strategy was to clear the U.S. forces in the Philippines out to prevent its use by Allied forces as a forward base of operations against the Japanese home islands and against its plans for further conquest of Southeast Asia. In December 1941, Japanese military forces landed on the island of Luzon in the Philippines, a U.S. territory. Manila quickly surrendered and a military government was installed on January 3, 1942. On May 6, 1942, U.S. Lieutenant General Jonathan Wainwright surrenders all U.S. troops in the Philippines to the Japanese. The island of Corregidor remained the last Allied stronghold in the Philippines after the Japanese victory at Bataan, from which General Wainwright had managed to flee to Corregidor. Filipinos mounted a vigorous guerrilla offensive and organized a resistance movement to oppose Japanese military rule. The Japanese forces waged a cruel campaign in an attempt to suppress the guerrilla opposition. Houses of relaxation or comfort stations and brothels for private and non-commissioned officers. There were comfort stations for Korean, Filipino and Chinese women worked. Also in parts of the Philippines occupied by the Japanese military, a number of women were raped and abducted through violent means to garrison buildings, then confirmed there and forced to provide sexual services. Women and children were slaughtered on the streets and in private homes, churches, hospitals, and schools by rampaging Japanese occupation troops. Such victims can be thought as of equivalent to comfort women. In many of these cases, their fathers or husbands were killed in front of the women and their other family members. Guerrilla forces rose up everywhere for the final offensive. On October 20, 1944, the Allied forces, led by General Douglas MacArthur, landed on the island of Leyte to liberate the Philippines from the Japanese. Through December 1944, the islands of Leyte and Mindoro were cleared of Japanese soldiers. During the campaign, the Imperial Japanese Army conducted a suicidal defense on the islands. Cities such as Manila were reduced to rubble. Around 500,000 Filipinos died during the Japanese occupation period. In an effort to take Luzon, the U.S. Army landed in Lingayen Gulf on January 9, 1945, Subic Bay on January 20, and Batangas on January 31. These attacks trapped the Japanese in giant pincers. The battle was a great defeat for the Japanese Navy, which lost 3 aircraft carriers and some 600 aircraft in 2 days of combat. This happened because the Japanese airplanes were getting old and their pilots had little training compared to the more modern and better trained American forces. Japan's conquest of the Philippines is often considered the worst military defeat in U.S. history. About 23,000 American military personnel and about 100,000 Filipino soldiers were killed or captured. The defeat of the Japanese at Leyte gave the American military a beachhead on the Philippines, which eventually led to the defeat of the Japanese and 50% reduction of its empire. In the end, the aims of the Battle of Leyte Gulf were achieved, but with heavy U.S. casualties. The Japanese also suffered tremendous losses with 419,912 deaths and injured. In your own insight, what can you say about the incidents in the Philippines during the American and Japanese rule? If the Americans were not here, will there be a Japanese occupation too? If both of them didn't come, what kind of government will we have right now? And before we end, let me leave you all with this wonderful message from Norman Schwarzkopf. The more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. Goodbye everyone, keep safe and God bless.